Video trying to clarify details about this assignment, which you can find in Schoology. It's called the Chipotle Nutrition Project or something like that. And essentially, we're working towards this work where you will ultimately compare and contrast ingredients from two different meals and then try to argue a claim to convince somebody to take you out to the healthier meal. And we're going to do that by working through these slides and then ultimately putting them together into the final product. So right now, the only one that we've seen is this one. So I'm going to clarify this one. But the other ones will work very, very similarly to this, just with slightly different information. And it's kind of up to you what order you do this in. I'm actually going to show you the Chipotle nutrition site first, so you can clarify how to use that. So this question says, what ingredients add a lot of saturated fat or trans fat? What ingredients add very little? And this other question is very similar. What ingredients might add a lot of total fat or very little total fat? So we'll click on this link and we'll go over to the Chipotle website, which should take you to this nutrition calculator. And you can choose whichever one you think you might want, like a burrito, for example. And there's a few different ways to do that. You could start by just like choosing a bunch of stuff that you like, and then looking at the nutrition details over here. Notice this only gives you total fat, and that first question was asking about saturated fat and trans fat. So if we want to see those details, we need to click this button that says View More, and then look at those details about saturated fat and trans fat. And remember, we're trying to find ingredients that will add a lot of those things or not very much. So if I could go down here and I could be like, all right, well, I like sour cream and I like cheese and I like fajita veggies. I just want to build out my meal. I really like guacamole. Then I go back here and I can tell that this has changed by a lot. It went up from like 10 to 24. So I want to figure out what are the things that added a lot of saturated fat and a lot of total fat. So I'm going to close this again, and I'm going to say like, okay, well, maybe it's guacamole. And I go up here, and I can immediately see that the total fat goes down from 66 to 44. So that does seem like a lot. And the saturated fat goes down from 24 to 20. So that's like some. Guacamole, it does have some saturated fat, but most of the fat is unsaturated, which we'll learn about the difference between those two in just a second. Let's keep looking for other things. Like if I looked at the sour cream, I'm at 20 right now. I'm actually going to add my guacamole back because I do not want to miss the guacamole. So I'm at 24 grams of saturated fat, 66 total. So I could try eliminating the sour cream. That doesn't eliminate a whole lot of total fat, but notice this went down by a whole lot. It went down from 24 to 17. So that's a very significant amount. I'm able to tell from that sour cream has a lot of saturated fat in it. Very similar to that, if I get rid of cheese, it was 17 and now it is 12. So it's like 5 grams of saturated fat, not a crazy amount, but that gives me some good answers to this question: what ingredients add a lot of saturated fat or total fat to the meal? I'll leave you to figure out what ingredients add very little. You can probably guess things that have very little total fat in them. This is a good point to mention how this will ultimately be graded. One of the cog skills that we're using is comparing and contrasting. And if you want to end up here, you do need some clear similarities and differences. This is why we're looking through these ingredients and saying, like, one similarity between cheese and sour cream is that they both add saturated fat or something like that. We're going to need that evidence in order to explain why these details, these key similarities and differences are meaningful to a main idea. In this case, the main idea is about fats, saturated fats, and trans fats. These next questions: why do details about saturated fat or trans fat matter? Or why do details about total fat matter? This is where this slide deck comes into play. So I don't need to go through this whole slide deck with you right now because you can do that on your own, but I will go through some very like broad highlights to clarify, for example, that fats are actually very, very valuable to the body. Fats can also be harmful, but only if we're consuming them in very large quantities. And these are all things that fats help our body do. And if you're looking for an answer to this question, why do details about total fat matter? This slide gives you some good answers to that, some positive things that fat can help your body do. On slide 2, I do encourage you to watch this video. Actually, we're not going to watch the whole thing right now, but I'll mute it. This video is kind of gross and kind of fascinating. This guy is talking about how he went in to get blood drawn, and this guy who had eaten a big old cheeseburger and a shake before he got blood drawn had this crazy gross stuff, this kind of white stuff in the blood test tube, and he could tell this is the kind of stuff that's actually in people's veins. This is a picture, a video of surgery. I'm sorry in advance for gruesome images here, but what they're doing here is actually pulling saturated fat that has accumulated in people's veins and arteries out of their body. So this is a surgery that people get done. Okay, I'll move away from that because it's kind of gross. But one huge takeaway here is there is a very important difference for the body between saturated fat and unsaturated fat. Things like guacamole or olive oil or fats usually from vegetables and nuts are usually pretty good for your body, actually. In small amounts, saturated fat is also good for your body, but if you are eating a lot of it, it can clog in your arteries over time. So again, these are going to help you answer these questions. Why do details about different types of fat matter for people who might eat Chipotle? Last thing that I'll mention is about trans fats. You may have noticed in the Chipotle website, none of their ingredients have trans fats. I wasn't able to find a single one. But they are actually very common in other foods. For example, if we go here, we can see the Wendy's Baconator and the large fries from Popeyes and this large shake. They have a significant amount of trans fat in them. Trans fat, we are learning now, is probably the most harmful to human beings. The Food and Drug Administration is taking steps to eliminate trans fats in American diets. The FDA suggests 0 trans fats. And this is found in things like microwave popcorn of some varieties, vegetable shortening, margarine, things that might seem like healthy alternatives actually have a lot of trans fats in them. And even though Chipotle ingredients don't have trans fats in them, you still want to answer this question with details about trans fats to say what can be harmful about that food. That might be a good reason to choose something like Chipotle that's using more natural type ingredients than something like Popeyes or Chick-fil-A or something. Even Chick-fil-A has a fair amount of trans fats in it. So anyway, this is a summary of how to approach this document, and you would do something very, very similar for this and this and this slide, but don't do that until we say so. We will go through details about protein and carbs and fruits and vegetables and vitamins and sodium. We will go through some of that in class, so you do not need to work ahead of when the assignments are due. But for now, you want to have slide 3 fully fleshed out. So when you look at this comparing and contrasting rubric, you can say okay, yeah, I'm definitely over here in the green. I've done the work and it looks solid.